stories. Oh, good, thank you. So we're turning towards Buddha's human lives. Been having fun with animal lives, and I have to tell you that it's hard for me to leave the animals, but maybe we'll go back to them. But it did seem important to make clear that we have been all beings are us, and that Buddha had bodhisattva lifetimes, according to the Jataka tales, whether you believe in past lives or you just have a sense that, I don't know about you, but I feel like I have about 100 million thousand lifetimes each moment and each day, and I get to make choices, and cause and effect has a lot to do with it. That when I'm friendly, it encourages me to be friendly more often, and when I'm not friendly, usually I get the consequences and remind myself, oh yeah, what about that vow? Let's come back. And not to mention, like I said, what we're reading in the news and feeling and sensing in the world, and the prayers of just, oh, may everybody be safe and protected. Just this deep wish that comes from our basic human goodness. The sadness. Oh, the women in Afghanistan. Oh my goodness, may they be safe and protected. And the part of us that gets cynical and says, no, sorry, the world's rough, bad things are going to happen. They've always happened, and I don't know how I'm going to cope with it, but I'll just cope. And a bodhisattva touches the earth, comes back, takes a breath, just over and over. Breathing in, breathing out, letting go. The profound belief in human goodness, which is why I'm going to tell you the story I'm going to tell you. It's about, the name of the story is Great King Goodness. But we could also in this day make it Great Queen or Great They Goodness or whatever you want to do. But this is a traditional story, so I'm going to use the traditional pronouns. I'm going to, there's some nice commentary in here from Rafe, and I just want to share just a little bit of it. He says about the Jataka tales, Buddhists accept Jataka tales as stories of the Buddha's own earlier births, as he evolved over the course of endless world cycles and countless lifetimes towards full enlightenment and Buddhahood. As such, they form the backbone of the literary and artistic traditions of Buddhist Asia. His words, writes Lama Govinda. Lama Govinda lived, and his wife lived towards the end of their life at San Francisco Zen Center and just up the road from Green Gulch Farm. So I got to know him, a wonderful and completely eccentric German who became a Lama in the Tibetan tradition. And one of the things I remember about him is he said, well, in essence, as I remember it to the Zen community, is you guys need to lighten up. and until you understand that this is cultural, this is it's not just a monastic forms, is that it's festivals and laughter and children and stories and I'm so glad that I was exposed to him early on. So Lama Govinda writes, his words, according to changing times, may be interpreted in a variety of ways. His meaning the Buddha's. Buddha's living example, however, speaks an eternal language which will be understood at all times as long as there are human beings. It's from Lama Govinda's book, Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism. Rafe goes on, as the fundamental expression of that living example, the Jatakas empower and dramatize some of the deepest values and beliefs of culture. A compassionate reverence for all life, as well as faith in the dynamic workings of cause and effect, or karma. Good creates good. Bad creates more bad. This happens, then that happens. If this doesn't happen, that doesn't happen. Compassion and cause and effect are implicit values and beliefs that extend throughout the Jataka tradition. So just a couple of words about the one that I'm going to share with you today. There are two sets of Jataka tales, one from the early Pali tradition, which Rafe says are more, which makes sense in the Pali Theravadan tradition, are more based in ethics and morality. As they came into the Tibetan tradition and Sanskrit, they began to blossom more into an expose or an encouragement of compassion. But they both underlying is we are all beings and all beings are us. This one, though, is you'll see it's completely based in compassion, and it is one of the early Jataka tales. Rafe's commentary says, stories are not true the way history is true. Although he says this tale is very Gandhian, you'll see. It's very much what Gandhi, Martin Luther King, the people in our culture that point the way to how are we going to change this world not through violence but through nonviolence. So stories are not true about what simply happened at one time or one place. They are true of the way of things in all times and all places, and as such are true to our most constant dreams and wishes. Imagination is what is it we all hope for and dream. And we need encouragement. We need each other. We need Sangha. We need Zazen. Because it's so easy to get lost in the suffering. Stories speak for what we hope may be and thus give us an accurate picture of the often unrealized dreams of the human heart. In stories, then, if not in life, we can fulfill the deepest wishes and make them real. So in this story, there's an evil minister. Buddha says, if you know the stories of Buddha going forward in time, one of the really bad guys in Buddhism is Devadatta. Like the Devadatta tried to kill the Buddha. But the great thing is that the Lotus Sutra and later things then say even Devadatta became a Buddha. So you can't go wrong here. It's just, you may have a slightly confused lifetime and do a whole lot of harm. But if you pay attention, you'll keep waking up and waking up because that's what we do. That's the truth of our hearts. And you'll see that the hero of this story, King Goodness, was one of the lifetimes of the Buddha. But we could also, I like reading these stories thinking they're all stories about the Buddha's lifetimes, because then we don't miss that the bad guys are just in a lifetime waking up too. They too are predicted to become a Buddha. So don't miss that. Let your eyes get deep and wide. Okay, you ready for the story? Just settle in. Let your heart and your eyes, your ears get soft and open. Beginner's mind. Once, long ago, when Brahmadatta reigned in Benares, the Buddha came to life as the child of the queen. They called him Silava, or Goodness. Prince Goodness he was called. And when he was 16, his father the king died, and he became king of his palace. King Goodness. His first acts as king was to have 6 platforms built from which to distribute gifts, one at each of the city's 4 gates, north, south, east, and west, one at the city center and one at the palace gates. And from each of these he regularly distributed money, medicines, food, silks, and jewels to all those who came. He regarded all the people with such loving kindness that he felt towards each one of them as a parent feels towards a beloved only child. Now, at one time, it was discovered that a certain minister of King Goodness had taken for himself money set aside by the king for the poor. This isn't an unfamiliar story. This man, the king also learned, mistreated all who tried to question him about it, using not only harsh words, but dealing out blows as well. King Goodness spoke to the minister and reasoned with him, but the minister just, not surprisingly, denied it all. "I have done no wrong," he exclaimed, "and will not remain here to be mistreated." He gathered up all his wealth, he left the kingdom, and he crossed the borders into the neighboring land of Kosala. And there he rose in influence and power until he was that king's advisor. See, this has been going on forever. We're so shocked. I think we need to continue to be shocked, and we also need to just go, yep, here we are. Greed, hate, and delusion and goodness. One day the minister said to the king of Kosala, "Sire, the city of Benares is like a ripe honeycomb, easy in the taking. The wealth is great. The king is feeble. Send your soldiers into the city. Take the palace, the treasury, all. The king has no force to withstand you. His goodness has made him weak." But the king of Kosala was suspicious. "You have left Benares only recently yourself," he said. "You are a spy for King Goodness." "Yes, I see it all now. This is a ruse to destroy me." Upon entering the city, "My forces will be ambushed. You are conspiring with King Goodness." "Oh, no, sire, no," said the minister. "Never." "Really?" said the king. "Do you take me for such a naive simpleton? I can see it all, I tell you, and I think that perhaps a little torture will bring out the truth for all to see." You're going to have goodness, you have to have darkness. "Sire," exclaimed the minister, "please wait. If you doubt me, just send a raiding party across the border. Let them attack an outlying village of King Goodness's realms, and then see what he will do." So a raiding party was sent. And after robbing, beating, burning, and looting, they were at last captured by King Goodness's soldiers, brought to Benares, and set before the king. "My children," asked King Goodness, "why have you done such terrible things? Why have you robbed and beaten others? Why have you burned their houses?" "Well, we were hungry," they said. "We needed money, and we were paid to do it." "My children," said King Goodness, "if you need food, money, and clothing, whatever, come to me in the future, and I will give it to you. You need not harm others. Such actions only harm yourselves." And giving gifts to the astonished men, he set them free. "As you see, sire," said the evil-hearted minister when those men had returned, "Benares is a honeycomb, a ripe plum. The king is intoxicated with his own goodness. He has no real power to resist. Attack, my lord, and take the kingdom from the hands of this weakling." "Wait," said the king of Kosala, "not so fast. We shall try this again." And so he sent another raiding party, and it was sent closer yet to the capital. And again violence was done. And again these men were captured and brought before King Goodness. My children, he asked, why have you done these things? And again the men said, why, we needed money and we were paid to do it. And then King Goodness again said, come to me in the future and I will help you, but do not harm others. By such actions you grievously harm yourselves. And then giving them gifts, he allowed these men too to return to their homes unharmed. You see, sire, said the minister, didn't I tell you? He is a weakling and a fool. Attack! Wait, said the king, suspicious still. Third time tells all. And so yet a third group of men was sent, and this time they struck in the heart of the kingdom on the very streets of Benares, and yet once again even they returned telling the same tale. They too had been given gifts by King Goodness and released. Satisfied at last that King Goodness was indeed a thoroughly good king, the king of Kosala raised his army, mounted his war elephant, and set off to capture the ripe golden honeycomb that was Benares. We human beings, greed, hate, and delusion is so strong in us. That afternoon, as King Goodness sat upon his throne with its legs carved like those of an antelope, he turned to his bodyguard of 1,000 champions standing there, and each of those men was an unbeaten warrior, loyal, strong, and disciplined. And King Goodness said, my children, it is war. I can feel it. You must be prepared. And those 1,000 champions shouted, give us the order, Lord, and we will destroy any army. We will drive them back, take their king captive, and secure our borders. But King Goodness said, no violence, my children, none. Let them enter the kingdom. Let them enter the city. Let them enter the palace, and yes, even come into the throne room itself. But you must be prepared. No one shall lift a hand in violence. Is that understood? And those mighty warriors, so strong in their discipline and their dedication to that great good king, all to a man, answered, yes. And then the army of the king of Kosala entered the land, and none opposed them. It's important to know that the Buddha lived in time of war and warring between the different kingdoms. He wasn't naive. So they marched into the city of Benares. No army of warriors stopped them. They mounted the steps of the palace and shattered the great bronze doors, and still no weapon was raised against them. They marched into the marble throne room of the great King Goodness. There sat King Goodness on his golden throne, surrounded by 1,000 champions. Remember, no violence, my children, cautioned the king. No thoughts of anger or hatred. Let thoughts of charity and love alone fill your hearts. And even as the men of Kosala laid rough hands upon him, he cautioned his champions over and over. No violence, my children, none. And so great was the discipline of those 1,000 champions that not even one broke forth in anger to destroy the enemy host. And then the great King Goodness and his 1,000 champions were all brought to the graveyard. Their weapons were taken from them, and all were buried up to their neck in the earth. The ground was stamped down around them, and as the sun set, they were abandoned there. And darkness fell. The night grew chill, and towards midnight furtive shapes gathered, pacing nervously in the shadows. The jackals had come to devour the fresh corpses. And as they slunk forward, King Goodness said to his men, let your hearts be filled only with love and charity, my children. More powerful than any weapon is the desire for goodness. And when the jackals came close, the king and his men gave a great shout. And once again the jackals turned and fled in terror. But after a time, when nothing more happened, they returned and drew closer again. And once more King Goodness and his men gave a great shout. And once more the jackals fled in fear. But again, finding no one giving chase, they once more crept near. And then for the third time, the king and his men raised their cry. But this time the jackal leader barked, "These are only prisoners, condemned men, trapped and helpless. Let us go forward and devour them." And this time they came on and did not turn away. King Goodness could see the jackal leader padding forward. Ears erect, it stopped, sniffed the air cautiously, then came on again. And in the brightness of the moon's light, its eyes glinted and its teeth gleamed. And then King Goodness raised his head, exposed his throat, as if seeking a quick and easy death. The Jackal King, sniffing cautiously, came closer still, and then seeing no danger, it lunged forward. But before its teeth could grip, King Goodness grabbed the fur of the jackal's throat with his own teeth and held tight. Terrified, the Jackal King lunged this way and that, struggling to break free. It pulled and tugged desperately back and forth and from side to side, moving the king as it did so and loosening the earth around him. The wild scrambling of its claws dug up and loosened the soil even more. And at last the Jackal King broke free and ran off, howling into the night, followed by his pack. Then could King Goodness, rocking back and forth in the loosened soil. This King Goodness was not dumb. He was not weak or passive. Rocking back and forth in the loosened soil, he broke the hold of the earth which had been stamped down around him. He worked his arms free and at last climbed up out of the burial ground free. And then he worked to free his companions. As each man was released, he too worked to free others. So in a short time, all 1,000 were again free. Now, as should happen, this is the last part of the story, but it's all important. Now, as it should happen, a corpse had been left lying in that graveyard, extending across the territory of 2 goblins. We are in the world of myth, but there are plenty of goblins walking around in human bodies. That's my commentary. Each goblin claimed the greater portion of that corpse as its own. Their argument grew more heated, worse and worse. And then at the point of coming to blows, one of these 2 goblins said, "In this graveyard stands King Goodness, a truly righteous person. Let us bring the corpse to him. He will divide it fairly for us." And to this the other goblin agreed. Dragging the corpse by a foot, they approached the King Goodness and asked for his help. "Certainly," said the king, "but I am, as you see, covered with dirt. I must bathe first." And then the goblins used their magical power, and they brought the king his golden bath. And he took a bath and became clean and refreshed. And then the king said, "Oh, I need clean robes." And so the goblins brought him his very robes, which had been laid out for the king, the usurping king of Kusala. And then they brought him perfumes and garlands. And then they asked the king, "Is there anything else that you need?" "Well," said King Goodness, "I am hungry." And just like that, they brought him amazing food. These goblins are being transformed right in front of our eyes. They brought him a cup filled with wonderful water. And the King Goodness was well satisfied, but he had one more request. "My sword," he said, "rests by the pillow of my bed. Bring it, and I will now fulfill your request." At once the great sword appeared. Then King Goodness set the corpse upright and with a single stroke split it perfectly. The goblins were overjoyed. The king washed the blade and girded on his sword. I'll just do a commentary here for those of you who know Nan Xuan cuts the cat in two. This does seem to be like an early version of that. He cuts the corpse in two, and the goblins are overjoyed. And then they ate their fill, and they were goblins after all, and when they were done, glad of heart and filled with gratitude, they asked King Goodness if there was not something else they might yet do for him. If you would set me in my bedchamber where the usurper lies, and also bring my men into the palace, I would be well satisfied, said King Goodness. And in an instant it was done. King Goodness stood once again in his early bedchamber and looked down upon the sleeping form of the usurper, the king of Kosala. Then, raising his sword, he struck the sleeping king upon his side with the flat of the blade. And the king of Kosala awoke and saw by the light of the lamp burning there his enemy, King Goodness, or his ghost, standing beside him, sword in hand. And the king of Kosala was terrified. Summoning his courage, he asked, "Are you man or ghost?" "Man, person, human being," answered King Goodness, "even as you are." "How did you enter? It is impossible," said the king of Kosala. "The gates are guarded, the doors are barred, the halls patrolled. What's more, you were left as food for the jackals. Yet you stand here, sword in hand, robed in splendor." And then King Goodness told the whole story about what had happened. And then the heart of King Kosala was moved, and he cried aloud, "Sir, this is wondrous. I called myself a man, was blessed with a human shape and heart and mind, yet for all that I did not know the worth of your goodness. While even these blood drinkers, these eaters of carrion flesh knew it. I will never plot against you again. I swear it." And then he swore an oath of friendship with King Goodness, swore it on his own sword, and he begged too for the king's forgiveness. And then he had King Goodness lie down in safety upon his own bed while he stood in the doorway and guarded the great king from danger. Almost to the end. When the morning came, the king of Kosala had the drum sounded and gathered all his people. And then, in sight of his army and all the people, he announced, "I thought I was a great king, and that this man here, the king of Benares, was a weakling and a fool. But in one night all is changed. My only concern was for power, my only recourse violence and war. But King Goodness is far greater. The forces of heaven and of earth are on his side. That is greatness indeed." Then turning to King Goodness, he said, "Great king, rule in peace. My men and I shall keep watch over your borders. I will use my might to protect your realm as well as my own." And passing sentence on the treacherous minister, he departed with his army of men and war elephants back to his own land. Seated in splendor upon his golden throne, with legs carved like those of an antelope, beneath his great white parasol, King Goodness looked with joy upon his people and upon his 1,000 mighty men. "If I had not remained true," he said to himself, "if I had not remained true, if I had not persevered fearlessly in goodness, both the people of my own kingdom as well as those of the kingdom of Kosala would have suffered greatly. At this moment, what joy arises in me! How could any victory gained through violence or war compare with it?" And speaking from his heart, he said to the assembled people, "Never doubt it. Effort in goodness will be rewarded. Even if you don't see how it may work out, persist in goodness. The fruit of such perseverance is sweet indeed." I like that story a lot. And of course, I have 100 million yes buts. I'll bet you do too. I was thinking as I was reading